Good morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about major project requirements this morning. So for the agenda, we're going to be covering cost and schedule risk assessments, CSRAs, initial financial plans and annual updates, and project management plans. And these are the three documents that are required for major projects. So what is a major project? It's a project that has any federal funding on it. If you have $1 of federal funding on a project that is over $500 million, it is considered a major project. It doesn't have to be on construction. It could be any phase of the project that has federal funding on it. If the project is unusually complex or it has a high level of interest from FHWA, they can deem it a major project. And the major project is based on the NEPA scope, and you're going to hear me repeat that several times throughout the presentation. I'll talk about PD&E studies, and Florida PD&E is synonymous with NEPA. All right, so sometimes we get a little wrapped around the axle on what is the major project. And this slide I've got up is kind of a hypothetical system. When you think of a system, we think of projects like Tampa Bay Next, which have multiple PD&Es. They have multiple construction segments on them. So you basically have to go in and look at what are the NEPA limits. And for this particular system, it has 3 different NEPA studies on it. So you just go in and you look at each of the NEPA limits individually. So segments 1 and 2 are on one PD&E. They have a total of $350 million in present day costs for just construction. And that's the rule of thumb that we usually tell the districts. If you have a $350 million construction project and present day costs, by the time you escalate that to year of expenditure and you add in all of those other phases, it's going to push you over $500 million. So clearly the first 2 segments, they're their own major project on one PD&E. The second, the green segment, is one PD&E. It's over $600 million in year of expenditure. Clearly, it is a major project. And then the third PD&E study, the 2 construction segments in red, I think they add up to $425 million in construction costs and year of expenditures. And again, that will be a close one by the time you add in all the other phases. It's probably a major project as well. I've got a little dotted line here on the green one that talks about an ultimate solution. It might be a direct connect. It could be future interchange work. But this piece of the project is way out in the future. It's programmed, or maybe it's not even programmed, and the district might be envisioning it 10 to 20 years in the future. Is it part of the major project? And the answer is yes. If it's on the same PD&E as this green segment 3A here, it is part of the major project. And you have to include it in the 3 major project documents. You have to put it in the PMP, the CSRA, the financial plan, unless you get a waiver from Federal Highway. I can't grant you a waiver. You can't give yourself a waiver. That has to come from Federal Highway. And I'm going to be talking about the criteria for getting a waiver later on in the presentation. So this slide I call my sticker shock slide. You're going to hear me talk about the 70th percentile quite a bit in my presentation. And basically FHWA, before they authorize this project to start construction, they want to make sure we have enough money programmed on the project to complete it. So let's say that Bobby Bull wants to buy a Lamborghini. He knows that in today's cost, that car is going to cost him $435,000. He can't buy it this year. He thinks he's going to go buy it next year. Next year's cost inflated is going to be $445,000. He's pretty sure he's going to get this car, so he goes out and buys some fancy tires for it. $5,000 worth of tires. That's considered prior costs. He knows that he needs to have some cushion in case there's a price increase. The inflation's a little higher than he thought it would be. He might wreck it. He might need repairs. So he needs $25,000 in contingency. So that car that he thought was going to cost $435,000 is now up to $475,000. But he only has $500 in his bank account, which represents work program. So he's not going to be allowed to buy this car. So basically, when you're working on your cost and schedule risk assessments, you're dealing in cost estimates. And I will be looking at programming, what is actually programmed on the project in work program. So if your cost estimates come in much higher than what you have programmed and you're short of your 70th percentile, we've got a problem on our hands, and we got to figure out a way to close that gap. So this is a slide we borrowed from our friends at FHWA. It's kind of a high-level look at what the process is for major projects. As the project is starting to come out of planning and going into PD&E, you're starting to look, is there federal funds on it? If there's no federal funds, it's not a major project. If it looks like it's going to be over $500 million, you start looking at doing your first cost and risk assessment. We call these pre-NEPA CSRAs. Before you get to your expected NEPA approval, you're going to want to start drafting your project management plan. Sometimes we'll do 2 or 3 pre-NEPA cost and schedule risk assessments. But as you're starting to approach the start of procurement, you're going to want to finalize your PMP. You're going to do a pre-construction CSRA. Whatever 70th percentile gets generated from the pre-construction CSRA is what you have to program to and work program. I'll do your initial financial plan. That's the last of the 3 documents. You'll make any last minute updates to your PMP, and all 3 of those documents have to be approved by Federal Highway in order for you to get federal authorization to start construction.
Good morning, everyone. I am Bobby Paulin, the State Value Engineer. I'm in the Quality Assurance section of the Roadway Design Office. Just for everyone who has been familiar with the value engineering and CSRA process, this has just moved over from production support. So now we are located, my position is now located in the Roadway Design Office. So if you have anything where you're looking on the websites, on the FDOT within the Office of Design, you can just look from production support over to the Roadway Design Office. So we'll get into this, and first thing, what is risk? And the Project Management Institute calls it the uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on project objectives. And looking at this and thinking about this morning, we deal with risk every day, whether it's going to the mailbox. The risk is going to be slight if you live on a cul-de-sac or a dead-end street, but you may have to, if you're on a busy intersection, you may have to watch out. If you're living in a neighborhood where people are going 40 instead of 25 down a residential street, you're gonna have to watch out to make sure everyone's still paying attention. Not that I'm referencing my neighborhood or anything. So let's go ahead and take a look to see what we have here. We have what is risk-based estimating? We have a couple of approaches. Before, in the past, everyone will be looking at the traditional, where you would have just a contingency set up. And the contingency would be to try to incorporate all the costs that would be associated with both known and unknown risks. So you would have that, have those funds and those resources allocated, but not knowing, when or how you're going to use it or how it may be affecting your overall project. So with that, you would have some issues with staying within cost. Cost may become an issue and schedule may become an issue because you're going to be in a reactive mode. You're going to be actually waiting for the event to happen prior to, actually engaging in working to implement any type of contingencies or any type of plans. So with this, you're on the backside waiting to see what happens. The way we approach it now with the risk-based estimating, we are trying to identify everything in advance, knowing that if we can have what our risks are up front, we can say, okay, we may know that this may happen and what are the effects of this event happening. This way we're planning in advance for those possible both good and bad. If we're looking at something that may happen that, yes, it will affect schedule and cost or one or the other, or this may be an opportunity that becomes realized, we'll be prepared to take advantage of it. This also helps us with staying in control of our costs and schedule, knowing that an event may happen, we're already prepared, so we are looking forward. And this is really important when we're looking at our budgeting up front. And also on our, like I said, just being proactive, we want to be able to have those resources in place as an event happens, as opposed to trying to pull everything together and react once the event does happen. One of the big things is why we do risk analysis is being able to assist work program. Each year our districts are going out and trying to identify what projects are going to be done and where that money is going to be coming from to complete those projects and just even get them started. Being able to have these risk and cost plans in advance will be able to help both the project manager and work program work together to where we have those plans in place to where we know that money is set aside. And we'll talk a little bit more about the money that we would need to identify for these major projects and what we need to have in place for the money. But also it helps give everyone on the same page. Your project managers, your project management will have all these items listed out. So this is also going to be helping out our different disciplines as they go through and are identifying, their scope of work that they're going to be working on. And as discussed, earlier, this is an FHWA requirement for all projects, total project costs that are over $500 million. So we need to have this in place to meet the requirements of FHWA. And having it in place is going to put us in a better place when we're trying to meet those overall requirements. Now we can go into a little bit of the risk process, and we'll talk about scheduling here in a minute. We want to be able to look at everything the data that we have. We want to be able to look at our cost estimates. This would be looking at our long range estimates and taking that information, seeing if those numbers are still valid. We're going through, and once we're establishing our cost estimates, we want to see prior to our CSRA, are these numbers still good? Are the quantities for the project still good? Are the estimated costs? And then also establish some type of range. Is there a possibility that the cost may go down? And in the way things have recently gone, we are having to anticipate what are going to be costs that are coming up. One that we've discussed recently on some of the studies is the ITS equipment. Most of that has been going up, and the availability. So in that, we're looking at cost, and we're also looking at scheduling. So those are some of the things that we would take into account for all the different elements on a project, whether it be structural, roadway, drainage, if there's any type of environmental. And also be looking at developing a flow chart. Basically, this would be some type of scheduling system to where we know, laying everything out. Okay, when do we anticipate certain parts of the project being completed, and how some of these estimates and some of the cost and schedule, how is that going to play into it if we do have an issue? So we'll have that both the schedule and the estimates in place going into the workshop. And at that point, that's when we're going to be looking at identifying and quantifying the risk and we would go through each of the disciplines. We would want to be able to say, hey, we have a drainage issue, we have a bridge issue, we have a permitting issue, and look at each of those, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Once we get into the cost and schedule adjustments, those would be based upon, okay, once we've had a chance to break down each of those different elements, looking at what may be a schedule risk, what may be a cost risk, and what may be affected by both. We're going to look at ranking those factors, looking at, the big ticket items, are they, what happens if these are affected? What's going to happen if we need to go back and make adjustments to the design, or if we need to look at our schedule, how's that going to affect it? And that's one of the things we'll look at. Will it be a minimal risk? Is something we just need to keep on the radar, or if this is something where we just basically know that a risk is going to be realized throughout the project. And from there, we'll produce the risk register, which will be a key element for the project manager to be able to keep track of items that have been discussed. And this will be a fluid document going through, as Diane mentioned. You'd be looking at an early CSRA that would be probably in the PD&E phase, and then once you move into the design, you'll want to go back and look at what was listed on that register initially to see if anything had been realized, if a identified risk is still valid, and then add additional risk for where the project is to date. So now we'll talk a little bit about the risk analysis workshop and pre-meetings. The first thing we'll do is have the kickoff meeting. This would be with the district and the project manager, and the project manager's consultant. They'll be meeting with the consultant who will be managing the CSRA. And in that meeting, they'll be identifying documents that'll be needed, which would be like the estimates, any type of scheduling, any type of role plays where we can go and look at the project as we go through so we can actually do a site and be able to go down and look at different segments as we discuss them. From that meeting will be the base cost review meeting. In this meeting will be the consultant, the CSRA consultant, the project manager, their consultant, and also key people who have an idea about costs that are going to be involved on the project. So if you're sitting in this meeting, this one will be going and looking at identifying are quantities appropriate, are the base costs for each of the different materials, are those appropriate? Do we need to make any adjustments? And this would be a good time to have somebody who's familiar with each of these different items and the different disciplines and segments of a project to be able to say, okay, yeah, this is what we're looking at. And that's when you can also talk about those ranges. When you're looking at, okay, we probably need to add 15% where on the upper side of a base cost, saying there's a chance for fluctuation going up, and also looking at if there's a chance for fluctuation going down. So this is when everything will happen during that meeting. During the risk workshop, all the information that was gathered during the kickoff meeting and the base cost meeting will be brought in, and this is usually going to be a 2 to 3 day event, and this is when everything happens. This is when we start identifying and quantifying all the risk and opportunities. And that's one of the big things. You want to be able to make sure if we do have an opportunity that's it's identified and also added to our risk register. So everything's on there. We want to be able to see everything all at once. Also, we want to be able to look at different strategies, and that'll be talked about. Are we going to be looking at is this going to be this threat? Are we going to mitigate it, or are we going to enhance it? Or are we going to just accept it? And we'll talk about some of the different strategies as well as we move along. And also, this will be a collaborative team approach. We want to have as many people who have a idea about the project and take advantage of their discipline expertise when we are going through a project. And who all do we want to be in that risk workshop? Of course, we want to have the project manager and their design team, whether that's either in-house or the consultant team. any external subject matter experts, and that would be individuals that have been brought in to work on the project, either consultants or other subs that may be involved. And anyone who's going to be affected by the project, we want them to be able to have a voice saying and be able to express their concerns on what they feel may be appropriate and needs to be looked at during a project. And of course, FHWA, and we'll talk a little bit more about FHWA's involvement, but they need to be involved in every step, and that will be going all the way back to scheduling, as far as setting up the meetings, making sure their availability, also having them present for the kickoff meeting, for the base cost review, and for all the days involved with the actual workshop. Then once we get into the disciplines, like I had mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we have someone who is familiar with each of these different disciplines in the meeting. And hopefully you want to have them to where they're familiar with the project as well, to where they can go in there and be able to talk about what they've seen, what they've experienced looking at the plans, what they understand the project to be, and to be able to express the concerns as you go through the checklist. And one of the things when you're talking, there's going to be a lot of back and forth between the CSRA consultant, trying to gather as much information as they can to be able to provide the the best information within the risk register and the final report. And one of the things I've heard from one of our consultants as they've conducted these meetings is, as they go through each of these different sections will have their own time to talk, and that consultant always says, what keeps you up at night? And I think that's a good way to do it. Okay, what are the things that you see as being an issue with going forward? What do you see as a roadblock? What do you see as an opportunity? And a lot of those conversations go on. That makes for trying to gather as much information and have as much information available for those studies. One of the things we'll be looking at throughout the study is being able to establish a 70 percentile, and this is something that FHWA will be looking at. We want to make sure that there's money already allocated through work program to where we can start the project and finish the project. So in this basic example you're looking at, you would have your non-escalated base costs, and then you have your escalated base costs, looking at inflation, and Diane can get into a little bit more about the actual budgeting numbers, but the main number we want to show on this one is the 70th percentile cost estimate. So when we're looking at this project, we want to make sure we want to have that $670 million allocated and appropriated through work programs, so that we know that we have that money to begin and to even get authorization from FHWA to be able to for them to authorize the project for us to go forward. Here's one of the other tools we'll be looking at for the risk assessment, is looking at the tornado diagram. And this is a really good example of looking at some of the bigger ticket items and how they could affect the overall project. In this example here, the first three items would account for over 50% of the cost for everything identified as a risk. You can also see on this risk diagram that you're looking at the 7.3 million for design, build, innovations, and land donations, the 1.9 million. We also want to identify opportunities that are listed here. As you go down, another example, if you were to just take the first 5 items through the additional costs of utility location, that's accounting for 80% of the cost for what we're showing on this. So being able to identify what are going to be some of the bigger ticket items, and what are going to be the items that we really need to keep an eye on, and what's going to affect schedule and budget. And this is a good tool to help achieve this. And after everything is done, all the models have run, all the information's been gathered through the study and the workshop, our consultants would be producing a risk register, and this is the tool that our project managers will be taking control of, being able to keep an eye on the items that we know are going to be an issue. In this example here, we're looking at the 4 items that are green. They have a low risk, but we want to keep them on there for, to keep monitoring in case it does. Once you get into the yellow and red, those are going to be the items. Based upon the data input, this would be the looking at the probability of there being an issue. Will this issue cause a scheduling problem? Will it be a cost problem? So once we take that information, like I said, and this information is put into our models and into the register, this gives us an idea of the ones we need to keep a closer eye on throughout the project. And then this risk register will come back and be revisited. Like I mentioned, this was an example from a PD&E CSRA, you would go back, and once you're in later CSRAs, you go back in and see if any of these items have been realized or if any of them need to be revisited. And this would also be the time that you would add new items as well. So looking at real quickly some of the different strategies you can avoid or exploit, you can mitigate or enhance, transfer or share, or just accept. And here's a good way to lay it out, looking at your threats and your opportunities where you can take advantage of both the good and bad. If you have the threats, you have your options to avoid, transfer, mitigate. And if you have an opportunity to exploit, share, or enhance each of these opportunities, depending on what the situation is, and that would be part of the discussions that we would be having during the CSRA to say, hey, can this be avoided? Can this risk be avoided? The threat. Is there somebody who may be able to take transfer? Can this be moved to the contractor, or is there a third party that may be able to handle that? Can it be mitigated? Can it be reduced? And then also on the opportunities, what can we take advantage of? What opportunities can be shared or enhanced by doing something a little bit different on the project? And then of course you have your accept. Basically, it's going to happen, and just be prepared for what that may entail. And hope is not a strategy, so that's why we try to do this planning in advance. Getting into the FHWA's involvement with the CSRAs, here's just a little bit of a breakdown. They're pretty similar on what an FHWA CSRA looks like as compared to what we do. Now, before we go a little bit further, today we're talking about major projects for anything over $500 million. It is still recommended, though, if you have a project over $100 million to conduct a CSRA. So the $500 million is not a hard floor for conducting the studies. If you still have larger projects, we still would recommend having a study completed. But looking back and forth, like I said, these are pretty similar. We'll have the breakout for our kickoff meeting and our base costs, and identifying the different values. But the one thing is, even within ours, we were going to want to make sure that we have that 70th percentile identified and working through with Diane's office and with work program. With our consultant-led CSRAs, we want to, as mentioned, make sure that FHWA is involved in the entire process. It's at least a 2-month prior notification of their availability, and this would be availability for the kickoff meeting, for the base cost review, and for the workshop in itself. We want to be able to provide all the information to the consultant, as discussed, being able to go through the kickoff meeting and anything prior to the kickoff meeting to where they can start identifying information to gather additional information. We want to also make sure that there's no conflicts. If the consultant who is working with the district, they can't be doing the CSRA, so that's something we want to make sure that we have that cleared in advance. And then also the draft and final reports will be reviewed prior to the final report. And with that, I have wrapped up my portion of it, and I will pass it back over to Diane for more information on the financial side. Thank you.
I'm going to cover financial plans. And so the purpose of the financial plan is to make sure that we have plenty of money on the project, that once we start it, we can finish it. And All of the financial plans are developed and written in our office and comptroller's office. FDOT is the project sponsor. We may have parties like expressway authorities or local governments who are ponying up money for some of these major projects, and they have a big hand in the project, but we're still the project sponsor, so we're responsible for the financial plans. So as we've stated, financial plans are required for all projects that are over $500 million and have federal funds on them. They're presented in year of expenditure dollars, which is escalated or inflated money. It includes all phases. It's not just construction, it's every phase from planning all the way through CEI. They do not usually include operations and maintenance because those are not usually part of the contract. The exception to that is our long-term P3 projects, our DBFOM projects that include operations and maintenance like I-4 Ultimate, Port of Miami Tunnel, or 595. Otherwise, the major project financial plans end when the project reaches final acceptance. They're coordinated by myself and the project finance office. And if you have a project that you think is going to be a major project, it's best to start discussions with Bobby, myself, Rob, as the project is coming out of PD&E or earlier. So when I pull the reports of how much money we have on these projects from program to work program, it's on an as of date. We call it an effective date. It's basically a snapshot of what the programming looks like on the project on that particular day. The financial plans have to demonstrate there's sufficient funds to complete the project. Programming has got to be at that 70th percentile or above. That is presented in the cost and schedule risk assessment. That 70th percentile is basically a confidence level. It's not a percentage of programming or anything like that. It's FHWA is 70% confident that we have enough money on the project to complete it. The initial financial plans have to be approved by FHWA before federal funds can be authorized. And after that initial financial plan is submitted, we have to do annual updates on the financial plans until the project reaches final acceptance. So there's several elements that I pull from the cost and schedule risk assessment reports. The first one is the 70th percentile. When you get a draft CSRA report, you're going to see various 70th percentiles presented in the CSRA reports. Some of them are in PDC, some of them may be broken down by major project elements, some may be by construction segment. The 70th percentile table that you need to look for, the one I'll be using, is escalated to year of expenditure and includes prior costs. And hopefully it's the first table that's presented in the report. For phased financial plans, we'll need 70th percentiles for each construction segment. These major projects are very large and very expensive, and sometimes they have multiple construction segments to them that are done over time, like Wekiva. It's a great example. It was comprised of 9 different segments for the FDOT owned portion of that project. We didn't have all the money to meet the 70th percentile overall, so we had to get federal authorization segment by segment, demonstrating, when we were getting ready to start construction, we were programmed up or above the 70th percentile. First Coast Expressway, West Shore, Beyond the Ultimate, they're all examples of phased financial plans. And for phased financial plans, you're going to have to probably keep updating your CSRA every year or so to reestablish 70th percentiles for projects that have not been federally authorized yet. I also pick up that top 10 risk to cost and schedule, the tornado diagram that Bobby showed earlier. Those are the top drivers that are driving up the 70th percentile. So I'll pick up those top 10, I'll put them in a table, and the districts will tell me what their mitigation strategies are to mitigate those risks. And I'll ask them every year on the financial plan, do you have any new major risks that we need to add to the table? So some of the inputs that I need from the district when I'm starting a financial plan is I need all of the FM numbers associated with the project. Everything under the PD&E, the NEPA limits, and I'll usually have to ask them a couple of different times for all the FM numbers before I get all of them. Well, I'll ask for a map that shows the PD&E limits and each of the construction segments that are on that PD&E. I'll ask for a project description, how long is it, how many lanes, what are the features, are there noise walls, are there interchanges, what's the level of service, etc. And I usually try to use the project description that is in the PMP and the CSRA. Hopefully all three major project documents have, pretty much the same project description in them. They should be covering the same scope. I'll have the section on where we are on the environmental decision, what type of decision was it, when was it approved, is there any reevaluation work going on, and when are those reevaluations expected to be approved. I'll ask for the right-of-way status, how many parcels do you still need to get, and how many, and when do you expect to get them. The project schedule is just a high-level project schedule, basically starts at advertisement and goes through final acceptance. Do you have any major local partners working with you on the project? What's your mitigation strategies? That's that top 10 risk to cost and schedule. And I'll ask for an estimated construction payout percentages by year. And that's basically just because we have $400 million programmed in a certain year for construction, the contractor is not going to get paid the entire $400 million in 1 year. It's going to pay out over multiple years. So I'll be asking you for, your estimated payout percentages. So these projects some of them are huge and they're spread out over time. So I'm going to talk about OINC waivers, and it's basically an OINC waiver is a designation granted by Federal Highway that if we have a piece of a project like a direct connect or some interchange work that we don't think we're going to be, getting to for maybe, for many, many, many years, we don't even know what it's going to look like. We can't really get any good cost estimates on it. We can ask for a waiver from Federal Highway to waive those pieces of the project, a future project, out of all three major project documents. So if you get a waiver, you don't have to include those pieces in the CSRA, the PMP, or the financial plan. And these are the three criteria that must be met in order to get a OINC waiver. So if the future segment, if the piece that you're building today, if it can be operated without that future segment ever being built, you have to meet that criteria. They have to be operationally independent. The second criteria is the beginning of the end of construction of one segment. There's got to be more than 5 years between the beginning of the next segment. And that's the criteria that usually trips us up. And the third criteria is the time that you start the project to end of the project has got to be more than 20 years. So if it's less than 20 years, you cannot get an OINC waiver. You have to meet all 3 of these criteria in order to get an OINC waiver. And if at any point during the project, the piece that has been wavered out, if it no longer meets all 3 of these criteria, you have to add it back into the major project. And to give an example, we've received waivers on a couple of our projects, and the district has found money. They've advanced the project, so it's no longer like 5 years out by the time you end one of your segments. The next segment that had previously been wavered out starts less than 5 years later. Now your OINC criteria is not being met. You'll have to roll those projects into your major project documents. So if you waiver something out and you end up advancing it, you find money and you have to add it back in, that will trigger you having to redo your PMP. It will trigger you having to redo your CSRA, and I'll have to roll it into the financial plan. So what's a little bit more common when we have major projects that have multiple construction segments that are being built over many, many years is to do a phased financial plan. So if we can't meet that 70th percentile on an overall basis, we will start getting federal authorization for each construction phase that meets its 70th percentile. And we'll have to, kind of keep an eye on the timing when you want to start your next segment. You have to make sure that you have a 70th percentile established. You'll have to update your CSRA, get a new 70th percentile for it. So we want to keep an eye on phase financial plans and make sure that we're doing a CSRA update for it in a timely manner, and making sure that we can get federal authorization for those future pieces that are going to start soon. All right, so this table is a 70th percentile. This is the table that I look for when I get the CSRA. I know this table is a little busy, but I'm looking for, say, for example, if this is a phased financial plan, which Okeechobee was not, I look to see, does the project meet the 70th percentile on an overall basis, looking for the P70 column, and I would want to make sure that the project has $783.4 million on it. And if we're programmed at or above that amount, great, wonderful. We meet the overall 70th percentile, we can get federal authorization. If we don't meet that, then we have to start getting federal authorization segment by segment by segment. And for major projects, it's got to include cost to date, which are prior costs. The cost to date that it's reported in the CSRA should match up what's in the financial plan. I usually send the expenditures to the district so they can give it to our cost and schedule risk assessment consultants. All right, so the timelines for financial plans are a little, to get federal authorization, they're a little different between design build and P3 projects versus design bid build. Design build and P3 projects can get conditional federal authorization up until NTP2. So you can go ahead and advertise your project, just knowing that all 3 of those documents have got to be approved by Federal Highway in order for you to start construction. For design bid build projects, the IFP, the PMP, the CSRA, they all have to be approved before you can advertise the project. So you really need to keep an eye on your schedule dates and be aware The timelines are different for DB and P3s versus design bid build projects. You want to make sure you do your CSRA early enough so that you have a 70th percentile in place for the financial plan. You don't want to do it too early because the CSRA results are only good for a year. So if they expire, you're going to have to update your CSRA to reestablish some new 70th percentiles. And then once we submit the IFP, then we'll do an annual update every year until the project reaches final acceptance. So these are basically the chapters in the financial plan. For an initial financial plan, it'll include chapters 1 through 9. The first annual update, we will add chapters 10 through 14. FHWA is mostly concerned with changes in cost and schedule since the initial financial plan and since last year. That's what they have to report to Congress. So as your costs change from year to year to year, you have to explain your programming changes every year until you reach final acceptance, and you have to explain overall how the costs have changed since the initial financial plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob Quigley to talk about project management plans.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you, Diane. Yeah, I'm going to cover a little bit about the project management plan. So the PMP, it is a guide used for the major projects. It documents everything about the project, from any assumptions to communication to the organization, different controls for the project. You know, it's a great tool that covers the entirety of the project, which can be handed over to other project managers. It covers everything about the project. It helps focus the project on the issues. It includes information on pretty much everything. So the project sponsor that's referred to in the project management plan, it's the agency. So in this case, we're the sponsor, and PMPs are produced in the district. So each major project requires a PMP. Again, it's a roadmap. It covers the project scope, cost, schedule, quality, risk, just all the different controls. And it identifies the roles and responsibility of each player in the organization as it relates to the project. So the plan also, again, it documents the different procedures and processes, which essentially end hopefully with the successful delivery of the project. Let's see, the purpose. It provides, again, these different things, project requirements, how the project communication is set up, different project controls such as managing the scope, quality, schedule, costs, risks, resources, and any different laws or rules that apply. So there is a submittal process, and Diane touched on it earlier, but the preliminary draft project management plan happens early in the project, needs to be submitted to FHWA prior to NEPA decision, and it also needs to be delivered in draft form up here to central office so that we can take a look at it and review it prior to going to FHWA. And FHWA can provide comments, and we'll go ahead and address those comments and get it back to them, so that the PMP will be finalized once both FHWA and DOT sign off on it. But it's not the end of the road for the PMP. The PMP is a living document, essentially, so it is required to be updated based on different things that happen in the project, and as things change, or if the project lasts, for several years, there may be things necessary to be updated in that project. There is quite a bit of guidance for the PMP production. The FHWA website you see here has plenty of guidance on major projects and the project management plan itself, a breakout into each of the different sections that FHWA looks for. So essentially that serves as sort of a table of contents, and it's very helpful to follow those guidelines. We also have some examples out there if necessary, if you haven't done one. A lot of districts have gone through the process and can look at old PMPs that they've done for reference. And we do have some project management guidelines that include a chapter on major projects and project management plan itself. That covers that. I'm going to kind of turn it back over to Diane to finish us off here.
Thank you, Rob. All right, so now for the test. All right, we're going to quiz you guys and see how much you know about major projects. 70th percentiles are determined for the major project overall and have phased for each construction segment. That is true. If a project cannot meet its 70th percentile overall, we have to phase it. The project can receive federal authorization even if the initial financial plan has not been approved. That is false. If the PMP, the CSRA, or the initial financial plan has not been approved, you cannot get federal authorization to start construction. Costs incurred 10 or more years ago may be excluded from the major project. That is false. Major projects include all phases, all costs, past, present, future. I run my reports back to 1980. I know that's a little bit of a overkill, but some of our PD&Es can be like over a decade old. So we've already done work on some of these PD&E limits, and all of that's got to be picked up in the report, whether it was done 10 years ago, whether it's programming that's not going to be done for another 10 or 15 years. We've got to pick up all of it. A phased financial plan is used when a project cannot meet its overall 70th percentile. That is true. When discussing potential risks during a CSRA, it's best to use worst case scenarios to determine potential risks just to be safe. That is false. And we always caution folks as they go into a CSRA not to pad their base costs. Our engineers tend to want to be very conservative in their cost estimates. But if you add padding to your base costs and it gets escalated and a contingency is added on top of it during the CSRA, you're just adding padding upon padding, and it just drives up your 70th percentile. And when you're talking about risk, if you think the risk could cost you an extra $500,000, don't say, well, if we think it's going to be $500,000, but just to be safe, it could go as high as $2 million. When you do that, it just drives up to your 70th percentile. So, try to be reasonable and realistic and not go to the worst case scenario. CSR workshop should include at least one pre-NEPA workshop and at least one pre-construction workshop. That is true. A lot of our major projects, we start tracking them while they're still in PD&E. You might do 2 or 3 pre-NEPA workshops, and then you'll do that final, what we call pre-construction workshop as you're approaching the start of construction. Whatever your 70th percentiles in the pre-NEPA workshops are, that's just nice to know, and it will tell you whether you're short on programming. We usually are. We're usually looking for more money when the project's in the early works, but by the time you get to this pre-construction CSRA workshop, those 70th percentiles are established, and that's what you have to program to. The project management plan is finished when it's signed by FDOT and FHWA. That's kind of a trick question. If you don't have a phased financial plan or a phased major project, you're typically done with the PMP at that point. But the PMP is considered a living document. So if you have a major scope change or you have any kind of major cost overruns, or if it's phased, you'll have to update it periodically. Annual financial plans are required until the entire project reaches final acceptance. That is true unless we're talking about one of our big P3 projects that includes O&M, and we still have to keep reporting on those until the concession period's finished. Multiple CSRA workshops are required if the project is phased. That is true. Major projects include all phases except operations and maintenance. That's true, except for the big P3 projects. The 70th percentile used in the financial plan excludes all prior costs and is in present day costs. That is false. The 70th percentile that I use in the financial plan has to include all the prior costs, and it's presented in year of expenditure. If a segment of a major project has been oinked, it's automatically de-oinked if it no longer meets waiver requirements. That's true. If we've oinked something out and we advance a piece of it so that it no longer meets all 3 of those oink criteria, we have to roll it into the major project documents. FHWA is copied on major project documents as a courtesy only. It's false, false, false. We do these documents for federal highway. They need to be involved in every step of the process. Parts of a project that will not be built for another 12 years or more can be excluded from the major project. That is false unless you have specifically obtained an OINC waiver to exclude it. FM numbers covered by the CSRA should also be used in the financial plan. That is true. We want to make sure that the scope of the major project is the same in the CSRA, the PMP, and the financial plan. So you shouldn't be using one set of financial FM numbers for the financial plan and something else for the CSRA. And then the final one is a major project includes everything under the NEPA, all FM numbers, all costs, past, present, future, and all phases except O&M, and that is true.